the most frightening moment in a job interview is when a candidate gets stuck, right? Now, what if I told you that it's possible that you get stuck in a job interview with a high-performing company and then you get up-leveled for that role? This actually happened with more than one of my clients. And basically what I'm pitching you here is your attitude matters in this critically important moment. Because, for example, if you get stuck and then as a result the rest of your interview will be a disaster, it will be impossible for them to give you a favorable recommendation. So the best possible scenario here would be they might call you back in a few months to do another interview, right? But long story short, the best approach to getting stuck in job interviews, of course, take your time, think about whether you can answer that question. But if you cannot answer that question, you can also be upfront with them and move on, okay? The second critically important moment in a job interview is when the interviewer is not happy with your answers, right? And the 5 most common scenarios here are, the first one is you answer another question. Okay, and if you ask people who interview others, I don't know, maybe to form their teams or hiring managers or recruiters, they can tell you that this happens all the time for candidates to answer the wrong question, right? Now, some candidates genuinely don't understand the question they're asked, but in most cases, people try to answer another question to deflect, to give an answer, whatever, no matter the cost, right? Or another very common scenario is when you bluff in job interviews, and this happens, from your elevator pitch to any possible answer, right? So if you don't want to admit that you're bluffing, I've had a customer who got challenged for the remainder of their interview, starting from their elevator pitch for the whole interview, on that specific metric that they gave on which they were bluffing, right? The third scenario is you may be rambling too much in these job interviews, which is quite common. And in my experience, most candidates do understand when they're rambling in these job interviews, right? Or the fourth scenario would be your answer is simply not up to their standards, right? So there are questions, the classic example I like to give here is, tell me about the time when your product, service, or solution was already working, but you decided to do more for your customer. How did you approach this? Okay, and most people will talk about the situation when they fixed something for the customer, which in fact this classic question is for high standards, people who look around the corner to delight the customer, to wow the customer, so to speak, right? And the fifth scenario, which is unfortunately a lot more common than most people realize, is the one of arrogance. Okay, so in reality, for most candidates, for most people, it will be a privilege to work for a FAANG company. And chances are you're not already working for a FAANG if you're watching this video, but I can tell you that people who work in a FAANG and trying to transition to other companies understand this surprisingly well. So arrogance primarily comes from people who want to get into FAANGs. Okay, so what's the fix here if you're not going in the right direction? Well, I can tell you from my experience, the first thing, the simplest advice here would be to listen, to watch, to keep eye contact with your interviewer during your job interview, because most candidates don't know how their interview is going. Most candidates would only think afterwards, hey, did it went well? I think it went well, maybe not. But if you have a good contact, if you have a good chemistry, even with your interviewer, which is formed in the first, during the small talk of your job interview, then you will be able to understand how they think, how they react. Human beings have biases by nature, right? So if you know that they're unhappy with this, you have two options. First is you understand, you'll think about, hey, do you know why they're not happy with this? It could be simply as you're rambling. Okay, if you're rambling, you want to address this. If you're bluffing, you want to address this too, right? Or maybe you don't know why they're not happy with your answer. And if you don't know why they're not happy with your answer, you could simply stop. Okay, the simple fact that you stop in a job interview will, convince them that, hey, you acknowledge that something is not right. Okay, or if you want, you can ask them, hey, you know what, it looks like you're not happy with my answer. Could you help me understand what am I doing wrong here? Could you help me get back on track? You'll be surprised how many interviewers will actually appreciate candidates asking them for help in these job interviews. And the third critically important moment during a job interview is when the interview goes your way, right? So it's when you get asked a question on which you sell yourself on your strengths, right? For a phone screening round, many people think that their introductory statement, impression-based hiring, is the most important one, right? So that you would give your elevator pitch. Or in a final interview round, maybe, they ask you about one of your most interesting projects you want to share with them, right? So the problem here is that not enough candidates sell themselves on their strengths in these job interviews. What happens here is that some candidates are either too shy, in their elevator pitch, they give up, a 2-sentence answer, which whatever they think they might be interesting, and that's it. For example, for a phone screening round. For a final interview, when you're asked to speak about your highlight in your career, you heard someone told you that, hey, 30 seconds answers are the best in job interviews. Well, my advice to you would be to give longer, more convincing answers, especially if you're these things play to your advantage, right? People are human beings and they have biases. And the longer you go speaking on your strength on a project that will sell yourself as the better candidate, also the more likely you are to bias that interviewer and get a favorable outcome. Okay, so I hope you found this useful and thank you very much for watching.